Our final panel for the day is historical fiction, moderated by the incomparable Paula Hundt. Paula moved to Martin County in 1996, and you can read about her in the program, but I want to give you the backstory on Paula. She has a very deep love for this community, and she's retired twice, unsuccessfully both times because she's gone back to work. These days, she's volunteering at a number of places, including the farm at House of Hope and the soup kitchen at St. Mary's. She supports a number of organizations with her time and treasures. She's a world-class cook and will be competing for the title of Top Chef Martin County on May 8th. And she's an adventurous traveler. And I'm also going to warn you, this is a very rowdy panel of authors. So please welcome Paula to the stage with her authors, Brenda Slocumb, Fiona Davis, and Madeline Martin.
We did not plan to match. Yes. We did not.
You're welcome.
Well, please say good afternoon to your new best friends. And thank you so much for coming this afternoon and for being here earlier today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as the authors have enjoyed it. They were saying that this is one of the best festivals that they've ever attended. And it's because of having engaged readers and participants like you that it makes it so much fun. So thank you again. Let me pass these down.
I hear this is a good book.
Shameless plugging already. All right, we'll get started here this afternoon. Let me turn this just a little bit so I can look at you. Fiona's on the end down there. Fiona Davis, if you want to hold up your book. The Magnolia Palace takes place in 1919 and 1996, and is the story of Lillian, who's using a pseudonym, and she's a famed model in New York City, adorning buildings, parks, fountains, and through a misunderstanding about a murder, is forced to flee and stumbles into a job at the Frick Mansion as a personal secretary to Helen Frick, daughter of wealthy Henry Clay Frick, who was not necessarily a nice man. The 1966 part involves a British model and a curator who are stuck in the mansion and begin to uncover secrets of the family's past. Fiona has written 7 books, historical fiction, about iconic buildings in New York City. In fact, we all want to take a tour. She's written about the Grand Central Terminal, the Dakota, the New York Public Library, the Chelsea Hotel, the Barbizon Hotel, the Frick Museum, and Carnegie Hall. Sounds like a great trip. She was also a TV actress in the soap opera that went for 35 years. She appeared in the last season, Another World. And I think their tagline was, "When I am with you, you take me away to another world." Fiona appeared as Dr. Doyle in the 1990 series. She also appeared in a crime drama called Della Ventura that starred Danny Aiello. She was off-Broadway playing in that and regional theater as well. So we thank you very much, Fiona, for being here.
Thank you.
Brenda Slocumb, the man brave enough to sit between these two women.
And to wear pink.
That's only because you didn't have purple. The Violin Conspiracy is the story of Raekwon, known as Ray, a black musician preparing for the most prestigious worldwide competition, the Tchaikovsky in Russia, when his Stradivarius violin is stolen and held for ransom. Ray battles prejudice and racism in the music world, a divided family in turmoil, greed, love, and betrayal, as well as the challenge of the ownership of the instrument itself. This was his debut novel, written in 2.5 months. I believe, in one of his interviews, I believe someone asked you about it, and you said, well, you were just sitting there eating and getting fat, and so you thought you'd do something. Thank you for writing for us. He began playing the violin at age 9, and it saved his life. A musician, concertmaster, and 23 years as a teacher, a band member, and a philanthropist for children to have access to musical instruments, music, and health care. Thank you. Madeline Martin, The Librarian Spy, is set in the 1940s in Portugal and France during World War II. American librarians were sent to neutral countries to monitor the wartime communications and provide intelligence and report back. Ava, who's in Portugal, connects with Helene, or Elaine as it was, a resistance fighter, and through their contacts and coded messages, they are helping people try to escape the Nazis. Madeline has written 38 books. Now, over 30 of them were historical romance novels. And in doing some research, I advised Madeline that I know she didn't pick the cover, but they are some of the steamiest covers I have ever seen on the romance novels. So if you're looking for a little diversion, go take a look there. She was working a day job and writing 6 to 8 books a year. Now that she's writing full-time, she's writing 1 book a year.
I needed a break.
She loves research and travel to research. And she feels that romance novels that she has written are about empowered women and the men strong enough to love them. I thought it would be good. That's for Madeline. These authors put so much into these books that I wanted them to start out by reading the first paragraph of their book so that you could have their voice in your head when you read. Fiona, if you'll start.
Sure. So the book starts in the 1919 era. New York City, 1919. Lillian Carter stood half naked, one arm held up like a ballet dancer, the other hanging lightly down at her side, and calculated how long she could avoid paying rent while her landlord was in jail. If Mr. Watkins was released right away, she'd have to avoid him until she pulled together enough money to pay for the 1-bedroom apartment she leased in the crumbling 5-story tenement building on 65th Street. Not an easy task when Mr. Watkins and his wife lived off the lobby on the first floor. On the bright side, the Watkins couple had shouted each other to pieces in a terrible fight earlier that morning, the screeching carrying on for a good 45 minutes before silence finally reigned.
Ta-dam. Madeline, if you'll go next.
By the way, once you guys hear Brendan read, you'll realize why I asked for me to not follow him. No pressure, man. He got this. Okay. April 1943, Washington, D.C. There was nothing Ava Harper loved more than the smell of old books. The musty scent of aging paper and steel ink took one on a journey through candlelit rooms of manors set amid verdant hills, or ancient castles with turrets that stretched up to the vast unknown heavens. These were tomes once cradled in the spread palms of forefathers, pored over by scholars, devoured by students with a rapacious appetite for learning, and those fragrant yellowed pages were stories of the past and eternal knowledge.
And I think for those of us who love books, I could just almost smell the pages as I read those words. And that's, as a librarian, Ava was the key to that, and so dedicated to the books. Brendan, if you'll read yours.
On the morning of the worst, most earth-shattering day of Ray McMillan's life, he ordered room service, scrambled eggs for 2, one side of regular bacon for Nicole, one side of vegan sausage for him, one coffee for Nicole, one orange juice for him. Later, he would try to second-guess those choices and 1,000 others that, in hindsight, vibrated in his memory. What if he had ordered French toast instead of eggs? What if grapefruit juice instead of orange? What if no juice at all? Breakfast had materialized before he'd gotten out of the shower. He'd lost track of time, caught up in the fingering of the Tchaikovsky concerto's triple stops, and water sluiced down for 10 minutes while he gaped at the tiny bar of hotel soap. When he walked out naked of the bathroom, the aroma of bacon wreathed in the suite.
Anybody interested in bacon?
Can I also just point out that the former romance author was the only one that didn't have a naked person in the front of the book?
That's because you had them all on the cover. All three of these books were written during the pandemic. And so we want to start with asking you, because most of us struggle in trying to write right after we get the word dear so-and-so, the next word doesn't come. How do you start writing? The paragraph that you read, was that your first paragraph? How do you put that first word on the page in any order?
I know the scene that I want to start with. It's usually one that's fairly explosive, so there's something really happening to draw the reader in. And so for me, it was having this woman who's a very successful artist's model in the early 1900s. The thought of her posing naked just seemed to capture the story of her life, of being completely nude, but thinking about, okay, how am I going to make rent, you know? And the kind of the fact that she becomes these beautiful statues that are all over New York City. And the woman it's based on, you know, really existed, and there are statues of her all over New York. And yet her life is very mundane until something happens to just drive it and just kind of split everything open.
For me, the opening sentence was the very last thing that I wrote. I wanted to, I liked the story, so I needed a way to really catch people's attention. And the worst, most earth-shattering day of your life, what could that possibly be? And I figured, you know what, I want to know what it was. What does this have to do with orange juice? I have to keep reading. I think it worked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wrote mine like 10,000 times. But, you know, for me, I really wanted to illustrate, because with Ava, before she ends up being sort of tossed into one of the neutral countries during World War II to gather intel, she's working at a library, and really, like, she was not meant to be a spy. I feel like if I was ever going to be a spy, I would kind of be like her. And so I really wanted to drive home her love of books, her comfort in the location that she's at, where she works at the Library of Congress. And so I really wanted to seed that part of her character into the reader's hearts going forward.
Do you know the ending when you start?
I do. I'm an absolute plotter. My parents are both engineers. And so I usually start with the character, and then I really try and figure out what the story will be, and I end up with about an 8 to 10 page single-spaced outline that I can follow as I write. And so I do know the twists. I do know, because I love a book with good twists, and I know how it's going to end before I start writing. And that helps, because with my books, if there's two timelines and an element of mystery between them, if I give away something too early in one timeline, it'll completely wreck the tension in the other one. And so it does have to be very carefully stitched together to become the whole book. And the moment when I'm outlining and trying to figure out how to pull off the mystery and the twist, that's usually the week or two that I'm drinking heavily at night. It's so hard.
Well, I'm not a drinker. I do other things, like... No, I actually had 3 different endings for this book, and the characters actually determined which ending I was going to use. I am just, you know, I'm very, very flexible. I read it through the first time. Wow, I like that, but I think I can make the stakes even higher. Wow, I like that second time I went through. I think I can do it even better. So it changes constantly, but I definitely do outline, and I don't drink, but other things happen at night like that too.
I also am a plotter. I like to joke that I'm so type A that I'm 12-point Times New Roman font. So, you know, really for me, I really front-load my book with a ton of research. So I do about 10 months worth of research before I even actually create my characters. And then once I have my characters fully fleshed out, then I go to my plot. And then I'm able to really kind of put my whole plot together. So, and it's really actually very helpful, because then you can just kind of follow point A to point B, and it makes writing it a lot smoother. So, I mean, it really only takes me about a month or 2 to write a book, because I spend about, 3 months pulling that whole plot together.
I saw an interview of you, and behind you was the whiteboard that had how did you describe it? 3 layers. It's what's done, what needs to be done, and what will be done in order to try to keep those things.
Yes, so those are my quarterly goals because I really am like a big planning nerd. And I have a giant whiteboard that reminds me every day of all the things I need to do. And so the very top is what needs to be done during that quarter. The middle is what I'm in the process of doing. And the bottom is what has been done. And sadly, that bottom portion is never as full as I would like it to be.
Thinking of your processes, have you ever put a character in and then later gone back and said, nah, taking them out? Who was that? I don't remember. Why were they in my story to begin with?
Not in my historical fiction, but I did have that happen in one of my romances once, and I realized that it'd just be easier to kill her than to take her out and rewrite the whole thing. So she died.
You know, that is actually a great question and a great point. I had a character in the story. He was Ray's manager, and his name was Drew. And he got so big, he started to take over the entire story. And I realized after rereading, oh my gosh, this dude has an entire book to himself. I've got to take him out. He's in my scraps pile, and I refuse to kill him. I'm going to do a book just on that guy because he was so cool. He's the coolest guy you've ever met in your life. You want to hang out with this guy. And he totally overshadowed everyone else in the book. So I'm like, I can't. He's too cool of a character, so that's a good problem to have, but I definitely have him in my scraps pile for another book.
Yeah, I had the opposite problem, actually. In my book takes place in 1919 at the Frick Mansion, and that was a mansion that a family of 3 lived there, and they were served by a staff of 27. Nice ratio. And so I had, certain members of the staff were important to the story, and I had the main characters. And after I wrote the first draft, I realized that I needed to divert more attention away from who did the murder. I felt like it was too obvious. And I thought, well, I need to add a character in to accomplish that. And so I added in a character, and it was tricky, kind of trying to shoehorn a new person into this community that I'd created. But it was the right thing to do. And I remember as I was writing the book, I was thinking, I need one more person. And I kept on putting it off, and finally I thought, okay, just buckle down and make those changes.
I was wondering, did you receive rejection notices when you first started out?
Yes.
Would you care to tell us how many?
How many?
100. Absolutely, but it's okay because I didn't start off as a writer. I am a teacher. I'm a music teacher, and I've written most of my life. I'm a songwriter. I've written. I would correct my friends' papers and everything. And the first book I wrote 20 years ago, it's a science fiction book. It's the greatest book ever written. It is awesome. So when I submitted it, naturally, I didn't expect that many rejection notes, but I have a stack of 100, and to this day, I still think that they don't know what they were talking about because that book is great. But everything that I'd read, it said expect to have rejection, and as a musician, I'm accustomed to rejection and critiques. I just take everything that I read and I tried to do my books better, and I accepted it all, and it's okay. And I also burned every one of those letters.
Did you, Fiona?
When I was in my early 30s, I wrote 2 mysteries that were contemporary mysteries, and, no one wanted them, which was probably a good idea. And it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I came up with the idea of setting a story at the Barbizon Hotel for Women, just because its rich history just really grabbed me. And I'm so glad I waited, because I felt like I needed to go through some things in life. You need to go out there and live your life and have your heart broken and figure things out before you can create characters who are living their lives truly as well. And so I'm glad those books didn't get picked up, because I think I was thin as a writer then, and it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that everything came together, and it came together at the right time.
I did not receive any rejections. However, it's not because I'm that good, I promise. So I actually had written 2 books, and I thought, oh, I want to get these published because I, wrote 2 books, and I thought it was going to be super easy. It's not. And so I joined a local writers group, and this one girl said, oh, let's swap some chapters. So I said, okay. So we swapped some chapters, and I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And so I stopped everything. I think this goes back to my type A personality, and I spent the next 5 years researching everything I possibly could about the craft of writing. I attended workshops, I went to conferences, I listened to CDs on tape, that'll let you know, or books on CD, I'll tell you how old that was. And so after 5 years, I put all of that knowledge to test, and I created my first book that was not one of the ones that's underneath the bed that nobody will ever read. And I submitted those to 3 contests. I finaled in all 3. I won first place in all 3. And so my next conference that I went to, I pitched to my dream agent, and she accepted me, and I got a 3-book deal. So that was a very long journey to get to that point after those 5 years. But I was very, very lucky to have not had the rejections. So.
I can give you some of my rejection letters.
No, you
Burned them
can't.
all.
You burned them all. You don't have them anymore because you burned them all. Sorry. Question. The compelling similarities between these 3 books, one of which is strong women in each of the books. Brendan, would you start talking about the strong women in your books? Your book, sorry.
Lots of strong women in the Violin Conspiracy. Most importantly, I think, is Ray's grandmother, who is Grandma Nora, who is actually my maternal grandmother. And it's funny you mentioned, Fiona, having lived experiences to be able to really develop these characters. I asked my aunts and uncles and cousins, was Grandma really this sweet, or was it just me? Every one of them said the exact same thing. She was just never had a bad thing to say about anyone. Another character, strong woman, Dr. Janice Stevens, is modeled after my college violin professor, who not only taught me how to play the violin, but she taught me how to teach. To this day, I still mention her name every opportunity I get, Dr. Rochelle Vetter Huang, because she is incredible, and she's one of the reasons that I'm still here. Even one of the characters, Ray's aunt, his Aunt Rochelle, she's instrumental, got it in there. she's
It's a quick crowd, they'll get it.
Sorry, I've been here for a while. She's instrumental in supporting him, and just lots of female characters that really build up the character of Ray. And, even his girlfriend, Nicole, supports him tremendously. And he's got a lot of strong women in his life, and they're really important to him in the book.
Before we go on from that, have most of you read the book already?
Oh, wow.
Oh, good. Well, and this is no spoiler alert because it's already on the first page, but the violin is stolen. The rest of the book is what happens after that. So I guess, would you relate a little bit of your own personal experience about that?
I was a senior in high school. I just bought a 1953 Eugene Lehman violin. It was supposed to carry me through college, through my professional career. We went on a trip out of town, and we come back. I don't know if you've ever had your home invaded, but the moment you walk in, something is not right. And all of the furniture and appliances and the TVs that were not there, the radios that were gone, I didn't care about any of that stuff. I ran right to my hiding spot under my bed for my violin. I looked, it wasn't there. I looked again, it wasn't there. I walked out of the room, and I walked back in because it's supposed to be there, and it wasn't there. And to this day, there is a hole in my soul missing because that violin was gone, and I worked for it, and I didn't have it anymore, and somebody's playing on it. So if anybody knows where that fiddle is, I won't say a word, I promise. Just give it back, please.
That's been a few years, but that's a compelling beginning for this book. Regarding empowered women, Madeline or Fiona?
So with the Librarian Spy, it's set during World War II, and with Ava's character, I have two female protagonists. One is Ava, who is an American, and she's, like I said before, sent over to a neutral country to gather intel. And when during World War II and women had to step up and really fill a lot of these roles that men would otherwise have, the men who were in those roles helping them or really showing them the ropes originally really were very disparaging toward them. And so with Ava's side of the story, you really do see her having to sort of stand up for herself and really prove that she is strong enough to take on this role and very capable. And then with Elaine's perspective, she's in Lyon, France, and she's working with the French resistance. And the most wonderful thing about Elaine's character is she's actually based off of a woman who actually existed during the French resistance named Lucienne Guesniac. And she operated the printing press for the French underground newspaper Combat. And she just really was such an incredible woman. Her story, I actually wanted to write a whole entire book about it, but my publisher was like, no, probably not, because it was this whole thing with French resistance. There was a bunch coming out, and so I wish every idea that we pitch could always be sold, but this one wasn't. And so I did get to still use the idea for a woman inspired by her character for the Librarian Spy with Elaine's character. She's just incredible.
Yeah, speaking of inspired by real people, two of the characters in my book are, one is Helen Frick, who was the daughter of Henry Clay Frick. And she was this very prickly, temperamental woman who never married, never had kids, created an amazing art reference library next door to the Frick collection, which is still around today. But she was the type of woman who in the 20s, when everybody was bobbing their hair, she disapproved. So if any of her friends bobbed their hair, she dumped them. She was very, very tough throughout her entire life. And the other woman who's inspired by real life is the character of Lillian, who's inspired by a woman named Audrey Munson. And she is carved in stone above the door of the Frick. And I saw that figure and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I went down this rabbit hole with her where she was considered the supermodel of the early 1900s. And she posed for hundreds of sculptors. And she can be found on Columbus Circle, in front of the Plaza Hotel, in front of the New York Public Library. She's everywhere. And what happened to her was incredible. She did really well, and then she got caught up in this scandal, and where her landlord killed his wife. And the police, as they were investigating, found a black and white photo of Audrey Munson in a bathing suit from when she was modeling. And they decided it was a love triangle, and they started hounding her. And she and her mother fled upstate. And the character's trajectory in the book is different from the actual Audrey Munson's, but what happened to Audrey Munson was she just didn't do well. She tried to get into silent films, that didn't work. She eventually tried to die by suicide by drinking mercury, and finally was put into an asylum where she died in 1996 at the age of 104. And at that time, she was buried in an unmarked grave. And I just thought, here's this woman who's been lost to history. Right? We know the men's names, we know the sculptors' names, but here's this woman who's all over New York and we don't know her. And the same with Helen Frick, where she was overshadowed by her father, who everybody knows. And so for me, it was a way to create Lillian, who again has a very different trajectory in the book, I promise you, is a way to really celebrate these women who we might not know about.
And the modeling that was done was really quite on the up and up. It was very artistic. Her mother was always with her, and she was sought out by the greatest of sculptors for her beauty, not for pornographic or other reasons. So, very interesting. I think there's another similarity in your three books, and that is one compelling emotion is fear. I think in the case of Ray, without the violin, will he be the violinist that he thinks he is? In the case of Ava, certainly she's a spy, but Elaine, death, torture from the French resistance side if she's caught. And on Lillian, certainly exposure and tossed out into the streets. You all have just met for the first time yesterday and bonded very well, I might say. This is the rowdy panel. But did you think about the fact that fear was a driver in your book?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, these women are working in a really uncertain, unsupportive world, and they're trying to make their way. And as a woman in the times, in '66 even, you know, you couldn't have your own checking account without a man signing off for it. You couldn't have a credit card. It was really hard to live your life and pursue your dreams. And so, yeah, for me, the fear is that they could just be thrown out and discarded if they didn't toe the line and follow, you know, what men told them to do. And so I find that's a really interesting thing to dive into in history, is to show how women were treated back then and show how things have changed or maybe how they haven't.
For Ray as a musician, and I think for any musicians you can relate to this, is it going to be enough? Is what I do enough? The hours and hours and hours of practice, is it going to be enough? You always have that fear in the back of your mind that you haven't done enough. And then put on top of that, someone steals your $10 million violin, which some people say, you know, the only reason you're where you are is because of the instrument. You know, that even adds an added layer of fear to it. And it's you are constantly second guessing yourself. As a musician, I can only speak for myself, but I am my own worst critic. I personally don't think I've ever given a good performance. It could always be better, and I am constantly critiquing myself, and that fear is always in the back of your mind, always. It's like, is it me or is it the instrument? Have I done enough? Are they going to enjoy it? You know, what are they going to think of me? So that fear is real. It's really real.
He does not have the instrument with him, or any, because we did ask, but traveling these days with something would be so hard to get through security, and whatever your instrument might be. But we were, if anybody has a viola or a violin out there in the audience, just bring it on up, I'm sure. Madeline?
So yes, with Elaine, with the Librarian Spy, she was with the French Resistance, and you know, initially in the beginning of the Nazi occupation, they enlisted a lot of collaborators. They had a certain amount that they wanted to try and have by a certain date, and they were even shocked when they exceeded that number well before the due date. So in addition to having Nazis everywhere, and German police, and even the French police, you also had collaborators who were working with the Nazis. And the French resistance, pretty much everywhere they went, they were constantly being hunted. It really isn't documented as often, though I read a lot about it in my research, where a lot of people suffered from like their nerves completely unraveling. Imagine you're trying to sleep at night, and every single time you hear a little bump or a sound, you think that that might be the Nazis coming for you, and you and your whole family are going to be killed because of it. I mean, just you can't trust anybody, you can't go anywhere, you're starving. It was such a horrible situation. And so Elaine's side of the story really definitely does delve into that fear aspect of what people with the French resistance had to deal with.
I was going to ask you, I think, how you create your gut-wrenching, abdomen-contracting, sphincter-tightening, that being discovered, captured, and tortured for espionage, subterfuge as a freedom activist would bring. How do you conjure up those words?
You know, well, I read a lot of firsthand accounts as part of my research. You hadn't really kept track of it beforehand, but with my the next book that I'm working on, or that is coming out and is set in Warsaw, Poland, and I happen to keep track of that because I don't know, got on this weird kick. So I realized I had over 100 nonfiction books, and I had over 15 spiral-bound notebooks filled with handwritten notes. So that will give you kind of an idea of how much research I do for my historical fiction. And when I go through that nonfiction, those nonfiction books, there's a lot of firsthand accounts, and those are so integral for creating the actual setting that really, you know, takes you back to what life was like then. And so a lot of, not necessarily the descriptions, but I guess like the feel of what these people had to endure really comes from a lot of those firsthand accounts.
And you do talk about the fact that when you're researching in a town, you might put 20,000 steps in a day, making sure that she's walking the right streets to make sure that they intersect as she puts them in her book and are not made up, because someone's about to catch that for sure, as we've heard.
Yes.
Fiona, how did acting help your writing, or does it?
Yeah, you know, I went to New York as an actress right after college, and I did Broadway and off-Broadway, and worked with a theater company where we all collaborated and put 3 shows a year on off-Broadway, from Shakespeare to Genet. It was, all my friends from then are my best friends today. It was such a wonderful time. And As I hit my late 20s, I realized that all my friends who were women who were a little older weren't working anymore. And then all my male friends were aging into really cool character roles. And I thought, well, that's not fair. And so then I went off to get a master's in journalism, which kind of sent me down the road of writing. But what really helped in terms of theater were a couple things. One is that plays are all dialogue, right? You can't sit there and describe the room. And so it's so concise in a play where the playwright has to fit everything he's trying to say on the page in just dialogue. And so I think it helped having read so many plays. And then the other thing is when you're stage managing a scene, in your head you have to have people move and do things in a scene, because otherwise it's really boring to have two people sitting in a chair talking. You need to have some kind of active movement, and they need to have an objective. And that's the same as on the stage. And so I think it helped in that way in terms of just figuring out how to make a scene dynamic. It was very helpful.
A comment that I found, author Fiona Davis stands out among other historical fiction authors due to her compelling storytelling, meticulous research, and her ability to bring historical New York City landmarks to life. Readers often praise her for the vivid descriptions and the strong, relatable female characters in her book.
Thank you.
So, as you said, the staging is important from part of that, to describe the buildings that you've selected as you're just walking around New York City.
Yeah, for sure, because the buildings become another character in many ways, if it's working.
Brendan, we have some quotes here from you, and you said, "Alone, we are a solitary violin, a lonely flute, a trumpet singing in the dark. Together, we are a symphony." I believe strongly that music is a life force and a transformative experience, and that novels are songs without music. Would you talk a little bit about your band?
Yeah. I am a musician. I know I don't look like the typical violinist. I know. I've accepted it. I understand that. I've been playing violin since I was 9 years old, and I've always loved music. I became a music teacher. I've taught orchestra, band, general music, guitar, and I formed a band with some of my students. Guitar students, you know, and the drummer in the band currently is one of my old violin students who switched to percussion. And it's so much fun because I know those guys, I know what they can do, and it's so much fun to watch them creating and doing what they do so well. And they trust me because they know me as their teacher, and now I'm their friend. And it's really weird because I always see these, for any teachers out there, you know, you see a student, a former student, they're always that 14, 15-year-old kid, right? We will be at rehearsal and somebody will have a beer, and I'm just like, what are you doing? No. Oh, dude, you're like 30. Okay, yeah, you can do that. So we're just a big happy family, and the songs that I write for them, you know, they sound one way in my head, and when I give them to the guys to play, they put their own spins on them, and it's so awesome seeing them develop this something that I came up with. You know, it may start off with 3 or 4 notes, and they turn it into some amazing thing, and you know, it's just incredible. And knowing that I had a little bit of something to do with that, because they're such good people, and I love performing with them, and I love seeing them create, and I love the music that they are able to create together, and it is just the best thing. And I would recommend being in a band with people that you really like.
How gratifying to see students progress like that. The name of the band, just so you would pronounce it, not me, is?
Geppetto's Wood.
I'd like to give you a little comment. SoundCloud calls it the band that pushes the boundaries of rock while delivering a booty-shaking beat by drawing upon virtuosity, honesty, and lyrics. You can catch it on YouTube if you like. I did.
Go to SoundCloud.
You talked a little bit about your editing process. How do you write, rewrite? When do you read? Who reads your books? Who gets to the inner circle first?
So I don't actually edit my book as I'm writing it. Otherwise, I would probably never write my book because I would constantly go back and correct and correct and correct. And so basically, I'll make a notepad next to my book where I keep track of if anything changes or I want to make any updates to it. I note the place where I'm located at in that book and what needs to change. So when I go back and do my final read-through, I know to correct it in that particular area. I also have a wonderful, wonderful friend of mine who reads every single book as I'm writing it, which is wonderful because if I ever feel like I'm completely veering off track, first of all, I can say, is this horrible and all awful and wrong? And she'll come back and say, no, because of this, this, and this, and this. And I'm like, oh, thank God. And then also, if I ever get to a point where I kind of get myself into a corner and say, I don't know how to get out of this, she has wonderful suggestions because she's basically reading it as I'm writing it. So it works out so incredibly well. And then after I do my one final read-through, I send it off to my editor and cross my fingers that they like it.
Yeah, I do about 3 or 4 months of research and then do a very quick first draft, which takes about 3 to 4 months. And the same thing, then I just start layering in edits to hopefully make it sing. I send it to my mother pretty early on because she's English and her only comment is usually, it's lovely. And that's what you need after the first draft because you know it's not.
That is true.
And then it's just layers and layers of building it up, rereading it, stepping away from it, taking a break, going back, until finally it feels like it's ready to go to my agent, and then it goes to my editor. So I'd say I do about 10 rounds of revisions.
If I can also add really quick, too, my mom actually reads mine, but she likes it in the galley phase. I tried doing it in the rough phase one time, and she was like, I can't even read this. I don't even know what this is. So after my editor read through it, now she reads it in the galley phase, and she has no problem sending me a ton of corrections to fix.
You can send it to my mom if you want.
Next time. Thank you.
I, unlike my friends here, would never let my mom read anything. No. Oh, and by the way, if you've read The Violin Conspiracy, Mom in the book is not my mom.
Oh, good.
I promise you, she's not my mom. I am so fortunate to have friends who are authors that are honest, and I let my author friends read it. Tell me what you think. Is this boring? How's the pacing in this? You know, does this make sense? And because my books have a musical tint to them, I really like to have non-musicians read them because early on when I was doing the first draft of Violin Conspiracy, everything was technical, and it made perfect sense to me as a violinist and a musician. You know, I was talking about bowings and articulations and this and this and this and all these Italian terms, and it looked great on the page to me, and I let one of my, I don't know what this is. What is this supposed to be? So it really helps to have someone who is unfamiliar with what it is that you do read through it so that they can relate. If it's not relatable, then I know I need to do something different.
A question from the audience, and Fiona, I'm going to put this out because we've talked about this. Have you ever thought of organizing a tour of all the sites of your books?
Yeah, we were talking about this. After my very first book came out, The Dollhouse, which is set at the Barbizon Hotel for Women, I got an email from this book club in South Boston. And they said, we want to come down and tour the spots that you mentioned in that book. And I said, okay, sure. And they showed up, and they were on this huge bus, and there were 40 of them. They were all drunk because they've been drinking the whole time. They're wonderful people. And we did this great tour of, you know, all the different spots that were highlighted in the book and had lunch, and they've done it for every book since. And it's just a treat. We've already planned out the December one. And so it's really fun. And yeah, I think that's a great idea. If I could make some money off that, that'd be great.
Book tours are a necessary part of promotion, but do you enjoy it? And what is the favorite part or the least favorite parts?
I enjoy it. I think it's fun. It's so wonderful getting to be around people who love books and who really are coming together for books. It's super fun for that reason, and just getting to meet so many wonderful people, especially people who maybe I've only met on Instagram before or social media, and getting to meet them face to face. It really is just like such a fabulous moment. The hardest part is I'm a mom. I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old and 2 very spoiled cats who miss me immensely. Like I pull out my suitcase and my cat gets very despondent because she knows I'm going to be gone for at least a day or two. And that probably is the hardest part, but I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful husband who is able to keep everything up and running, for the most part, while I'm gone.
Who's always introduced as Mr. Awesome, by the way.
He really is awesome.
We were all fortunate here to, in our system of Audible books through Libby, to have all of these books available to us to listen to before this event came up. In your Audible books, do you participate at all in the selection of who will be reading your book?
100%. I was given for the Violin Conspiracy, I was given a list of 4 gentlemen to read the book, and they read each an excerpt. And they were all very, very good. And just the fact that I was the one that got to choose, I thought that was fantastic. Yeah, but the pressure was super high. What if he sounds good reading this chapter, but the next chapter he just completely blows it? But J.D. Jackson read The Violin Conspiracy and did a fantastic job, and I was really honored that I had the privilege of selecting the reader, and it was, it's a big responsibility because, it's going to represent your book, so you really have to be spot on with that choice, and I'm glad that they did give me that opportunity.
And I shared with Brendan that I read that his reader had just won the Audie Award from Audible for being the best male narrator.
It's huge. And tell them who's doing the next book, who's narrating the next book.
I've been told that my voice is not awful. So I actually read the author's notes for my first 2 books. I read the author's notes, and when I went and did the recording at the studio, have you ever considered reading your own book? I was like, yeah. Why? Because I think you should. You think so? Yeah. Okay. All right. Since you guys say yes, I'll do it. I'll do the 3rd one, yes.
And now you know why I didn't want to go after him when he read.
And your books? Have you participated?
In Audible? Yes. Audiobooks? Yes. So I am a huge audiobook listener. Going back to the whole mom thing, I usually drive I think 3 to 4 hours a day because my kids are in everything. And so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So I have my personal favorites. And when I first received the list of narrators that I wanted to consider, they said, or you can suggest somebody else. And I happen to be a huge Saskia Marleveld fan. And so I said, I felt like asking for Saskia Marleveld was kind of like asking for Jennifer Aniston to play me in a live movie. And I really did not think she was going to say yes. And they came back almost immediately and she said yes. And I think they could hear me screaming all the way in New York because I was so excited. And she's just lovely and she's just done such an exquisite job. So I'm so lucky.
Yeah, and I've been lucky enough to be able to choose the narrator for each book, and usually there's 2 narrators. And I have to say, the people at Dutton and Penguin Random House do a great job of producing the audio. They come to us and will ask for, okay, how do you want this word pronounced, or what kind of accent do you want for this person? And then they just go and create such an amazing world of its own. It's really a wonderful, wonderful gift.
In doing research for this, I watched a number of interviews in various forms. Brendan, you have a podcast. Would you like to talk about your podcast a bit?
I do. My podcast is called, I should say, and I'm going to do this, I apologize, shameless, my award-winning podcast. I got an award for a Creative Muse Award for it, and it's called How Music Can Save Your Life. And I'm so passionate about music and its life-saving properties. I really, really am. I've had the opportunity to interview jazz musicians, rock musicians, classical musicians, conductors, pianists, bassoonists, guitar, everybody, violinists. My first interview is with a jazz violinist named Ken Ford, and it is incredible all of the stories that we have that are so similar, and we all have the same themes. We started off one way, music came into our lives, and it changed our lives for the better. Music is my shameless plug for music. It is the only thing that you can go across the world not speak the language, and have an instant connection with someone. Music is a life-saving force. Support your local school music programs.
With some communication ahead of time, I was relaying that we have a very wonderful town of not only appreciation for musical art, but for reading and literacy and the joy of books, as you see here. I also shared with Brendan that we had very famous Hilary Hahn here since she was 12 years old. We had Joshua Bell at the Lyric. We also had Itzhak Perlman, and the only American to ever win the competition that is referred to in the book actually lives here in Stewart, which was a surprise to find out. I have a question. It's rather a philosophical one, and that is, we know what the story is of your book. What is the message?
I'll go first. For me, there's two models in the book. There's Lillian in the 1919s, and then in the 60s, there's Veronica. And both women, for me, the crux of the story is what's the difference between being looked at or between being seen? What is the difference between those two? And really figuring out, especially as these women in the past who are judged by their looks, sometimes very harshly, when is it that it's the person deep down inside that counts? And who are the people who are looking at you in that way that they see that person that's deeper down and more complex than just the exterior?
Either one of you.
Please.
For the Librarian Spy, the message of the book is really that words have power. First, we have Ava, who is gathering these pamphlets and sending them back to America for them to assess to see what sort of value they can find to get detailed information about the Nazis to defeat them. And then as far as Elaine goes, with working with the printing press, the words that they publish have so much power. These are the words that are able to sway the tides of war, that are able to draw people into the French resistance, that are able to stop the spread of disinformation that the Germans are trying to put out there to really just completely damage the morale of the French people. So having that even though they don't have weapons to fight against them, they have words, and words are so powerful.
Really two messages. One, do what you love to do because you love it. Don't ever let someone tell you you can't, ever. Absolutely. And never, ever, ever give up. Ever. Never give up.
Well, thank you very much for that. I wondered, as we said, the words are on the pages and we can all read them, but there's heart and life and drive in what comes through the books. And I was curious to know what was your driving force on that. Have a couple more questions from the audience. We have just a minute or two. And that is, would you talk a little bit about your nonprofit, which with the music for children?
My nonprofit is called Hands Across the Sea, and it's based in the Philippines. I did a tour of the Philippines back in the early 2000s, and the conditions over there were just unbelievable. And even though the conditions were so bad, the people were so happy. They were so spiritually happy. And I gave 35 American dollars to someone that I'd met over there who was really, really nice. With that money, $35. They built an extra room onto their house. 12 people were living in one room. He could move his family into the extra part of the house with $35. I said, what could 50 do? What could 100 do? What could 1,000 do? So I started collecting money for my friends. I stopped buying a new pair of shoes every month, and I would go over to the Philippines once a year, take money, and buy supplies. What do you need? We need this. We need reeds. We need strings. We need toothbrushes. We need this. And I would buy it and have money left over. And it's just, I'm trying to help people who can't help themselves, because at some point we're all going to need a hand.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that there happens to be a question here regarding, it's a technical question that I'm sure you can answer, but perhaps in that room over there, which is talk about the different types of bows and the change in the sound from your violin. I am aware that there are music teachers and music students in the room and the audience today who came specifically just to hear you talk about the violin.
I know what this is. This is a test. You guys don't believe it, do you? That's what it is. Yeah, I got you guys. Now, are you talking a Baroque bow or a standard violin bow? What do we see? I know my terms. Your Baroque bow is a little bit shorter. And the resistance is a lot different than a standard bow, where you can, with the frog, you can actually loosen and tighten the strings. And you're going to get a different sound. A Baroque instrument is going to be a little bit softer, and it has a flatter bridge, so you can play double stops a lot easier. Wow, Brendan knows what he's talking about. Yeah.
I mean, I was convinced.
Tell us what's next for you. What's your next book? When's it coming out?
Yeah, my next book comes out June 13th. It's called The Spectacular. And it came about when I got an email through my author website, and a woman said, I'm in my 80s, I'm a former rockette, and if you want to know the secrets of Radio City, you should call me. So I had to do that. And so I called. She was amazing. We had a great conversation. I went on to interview a number of women who danced at Radio City in the 50s and 60s, and created a book based on that. It's about a woman who kind of defies her family's wishes to become a rockette, and she also gets caught up in a hunt for a bomber who's been targeting iconic New York City buildings. And that's based on an actual bomber named the Mad Bomber, who terrorized New York for 16 years, setting bombs all over, and no one remembers this. And so I kind of pulled those two stories together, so it's a backstage look at Radio City, which is really fun, and then also a bit of a thriller aspect on the hunt to find the killer.
That is awesome.
It's fun.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read that book.
I know, that sounds really good. My next book is called The Keeper of Hidden Books, and it's set in Warsaw, Poland during World War II. And it is based on the true stories of the Warsaw public librarians during that time, trying to, basically when the Nazis came in, they were trying to remove all Polish culture. So they were pulping books, they were completely shutting down libraries, museums. So these are the secret libraries that operated inside and out of the ghetto, and also trying to save all of these books. And it comes out on August 1st, which is a really big deal because August 1st was the day of the Warsaw Uprising. And to this day, at 5 p.m. on August 1st, all of Warsaw goes quiet, except for all of the horns and sirens that are blaring all throughout the city in celebration of the Warsaw Uprising, even to this day.
My next book is called Symphony of Secrets, and it comes out April 18th. I'm really excited about this book. It deals with dual timelines, one set in the 1920s Jazz Age New York and one in modern day. It involves a neurodivergent composer who meets another composer, and it's like, which one of them is the real genius behind all of this music? And in the present day, Bern Hendricks, who is actually based on my late brother, is putting everything together, discovering the secrets, and trying to outrun a major corporation that is trying to silence him. Symphony of Secrets.
We can't wait to read them all. It has been wonderful to meet these authors and to do the research on them over the past few months. It's a privilege to have them here in our town and to greet them as warmly as you have. I can't thank you enough. They will be across the hall for signing of their books, and we hope that you'll flood the room and have your books signed. But before you do that, please don't go. Sue's going to close out the event, but please give a warm round for my authors.
And for Paula.
What an amazing day. And I want to give a big thank you to all of the people who are volunteering, library staff and the volunteers. I moved here in 1999, and the very first thing I did was get my library card. And they identified me as fresh meat. And I ended up volunteering the next week, and I haven't stopped since. So let's please support our wonderful libraries and keep them being centers of our community. On behalf of the Library Foundation of Martin County and the Martin County Library System, on behalf of all of the authors and for all of the people who read, thank you for being here and being part of this year's BookMania, and for the many ways you support our library system. Do you think we should do this again next year? Okay, we'll go across the hall, buy some books, keep reading, tell your friends about this, and have a wonderful rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Sue, very much for moderating today for the whole event. Thank you.